Or can you hear me now? That's the question. I show my mic is on, but I don't see. Wow. So the enemy really does not want this to be heard today. And so I'm wondering if you're still online, whoever it is, if somebody could just give me a thumbs up a or let me know in some form or fashion. I'm going to go with it is because I see the green markers on that, and I don't know if it did before. I've had some audio problems before, but I want you to stay with me on this podcast. And so if you're just catching this, you moved up into the forward piece of this. Um, Stay with me to the end because we're going to talk about a specific date that's coming up. And so if we're looking at the Jubilee calendar, we're on the 250th anniversary, which is exactly 5 Jubilees. And so on July 4th, 1776, during the signing of the Declaration of Independence, on a Jubilee calendar, that's the 14th of Tammuz, which is Passover, which is kind of interesting if you're thinking whether we're a covenant nation or whether God's got some particular timelines or whether he's rising up a nation for a particular time. Then that's a big deal because 250 years later on the Jubilee calendar is also Passover. And so when we're looking at Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862, right, that was Tishrei 1 on the Jubilee calendar. And so I'm hoping somebody can hear me on this because it's kind of cool because that's literally the Feast of Trumpets. And that's the entry into the civil new year. It's going in and declaring liberty on the Feast of Trumpets, and throughout that whole land there's a blowing of a shofar. And to have Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation take place on that particular day, when you look at it on a Jubilee solar calendar, how it lines up, that's amazing. Also, the surrender of the Civil War was on April 9th, 1865. Guess what? That lines up on Nisan 14. And so there's an amazing thing that begins to happen when you begin to lay these out on a timeline. It's really kind of cool. And I think I said the 14th of Tammuz was a, but yeah. And so anyway, when you look at that and you begin laying all of this out, it's like, really, what is the big deal? What's the big deal when we begin to look at these kind of things? Well, there's an interesting thing that's getting ready to take place. And when we begin to lay it out and we look at our nation is at a precipice. Either it's going to be a godly nation or it's not going to be a godly nation. And I was reminded that God had given me a vision back in when my wife and I went to the National Mall. Lou Engle, I had that encounter with Lou Engle and been prayed over by Lou, and really wanted to make sure that we were out there during Washington, D.C. when they had the Million Women March. And we were out there when they were breaking that altar and when Jonathan Cahn was breaking that altar. And then the next day, I had this vision dream, and I saw a deed of the United States. And during the dream sequence, I was praising God, had my hands up in the air, and for some reason I looked back, and on my chair was a envelope, a next day delivery kind of envelope on my chair, and I could see that it was open. And for some reason, I was compelled to go open it. When I opened it, it was a very old looking deed, and it said United States of America, and had this different eagle looking than what I'm used to seeing on there. And then I woke up, and as I woke up, I heard, "What will you do with the deed?" And I think we're coming up on that spot. We just rededicated the United States to God, but yet we haven't torn down the high places. And so when we look at that, there's some things that are going to be coming up. And one of those things that's going to be coming up is the 4th of July. And the 4th of July, like I said, it falls on that specific solar date. But another thing happens on September 22nd. And I don't know if you've ever seen the image. I should have pulled it up and had it ready for to be able to put on to the podcast, but I didn't have time. I kind of wanted to get this out there just a little bit, and we'll probably do a couple of episodes, kind of maybe unpacking it a little bit, or maybe a blog point. But on September 22nd, right? That's the Feast of Trumpets. And when you look at the Feast of Trumpets and what it signifies, that's a big deal. Satan has this way of taking holidays and holy days and trying to twist them and pervert them or to use them. He's not a new author of anything. In fact, he's got no new tricks up his books, but he doesn't get to create anything. He can only use the science, the principles that God has in and he can take and pervert them. And just like with the nation of Israel, something can start as pure and holy and then be defiled. And that might actually be some of the case of the United States, because when we see the establishment of Washington, D.C., something has shifted. I mean, why do we have these streets laid out like a pentagram? Why do we have this big, huge obelisk from Egypt that's a granite quartz obelisk, and it actually lines up with the reflection pool that lines up with the state capitol? And why do we have all of these pagan symbols in the United States? And we can say that we're a nation built on biblical principles for sure. When the Puritans were coming over, so on and so forth, and when we were being established, and we were looking at the declarations of independence, and we put all of those things into place. But the question is, did we remain? And if we look at how the streets of Washington, D.C. are set up, it should leave us scratching our head. But when I looked at some of the science behind it, then some other things began to be compelling, especially as I was looking at what the Feast of Trumpets is, and it's going to line up. Did you realize that the fall equinox, the streets on our national capital are designed around the fall equinox? They've surveyed it beautifully. It's laid out immaculately according to a schematic of that's unholy, to be honest with you. But it marks out the fall equinox, and it will run straight down and line up with the state capitol, with the obelisk, with the reflecting pool. An interesting thing about that reflecting pool is they just put so much effort into seeing it restored for this 250th anniversary. And when we move into September 22nd of this year coming up, there's something that's crazy happens. Not in the history of the U.S. Every fall equinox has always landed and has always that diagram of our nation's capital. It's absolute. It always shows up. But this is the first time in our nation's history that the Feast of Tabernacles actually falls on that particular day, 250 years after the streets have been, well, not quite 250 years, because they were built in the later after the signing. But that's a crazy coincidence. A matter of fact, the mathematical reality is that it's 1 in 39,447,000. That's the mathematical odds. And so I just had to kind of look at that. And that mathematical odd is if you were standing on the Empire State Building, and there's lightning storm all the way around you, striking everywhere hundreds of times per minute, and you took one atom of a molecule of water and was managed to blow one atom out and have a lightning strike that atom at that particular moment that you threw it out. That's the kind of odds. Or it actually gave me the Texas, if you had 2 foot of gold coins all stacked 2 feet deep, and then you threw one coin in and had a bulldozer go back and forth across Texas, and you reached down and pulled it out. That's the kind of odds that this alignment that's happening in Washington, D.C. on that street on that day, that's the kind of craziness of 1 in 39,447,000 odds. That's insane. So why? The question to me was why? Why did we build the streets so to be in that kind of a direction, in that kind of a piece, and why did they do it that way that we end up with that kind of a piece? I'm having a little camera audio. Man, the devil does not want this to come out at all. And so for whatever reason, things are messing up on this podcast. And so I'm just going to get it anyway. And if I have to do this podcast 2 or 3 times, I'm going to get it done anyway. And so God's never late, and he doesn't check our human calendars. And the rise and the fall of Gentile nations and the United States and all that, he doesn't check with us, but he does have a time clock. And if he's having this event and some of the things of our nation history line up with the things and the of holy days and feast days that he's put in alignment on a calendar, then we should probably scratch our heads, take a moment, take a pause, and go, what's he really trying to say to us? You know, the enemy, like I said, he doesn't get to do anything. That he gets to use some things. But if you've been following this podcast stream, we've been looking at the book of Enoch. And in the book of Enoch, there's what's called this 10% rule. In other words, and we'll get into the book of Enoch a little bit, but on a later podcast, whether we should be looking at it, not be looking at it. But they have this thing that the powers and principalities, 10% of them were allowed to stay to test mankind, but 90% of the fallen angels are bound in the earth, and they're bound up in chains. We can think of that from our own scripture. And so that kind of makes you go, well, what is that all about? And when we look at this big, huge obelisk, 555 feet tall, made out of granite on a solar equinox, and we begin to look back at other pagan rituals, you'll find that there's a big pool of water. It was called for casting, and it was trying to communicate with the evil. They're evil gods, so they would have a statue or an obelisk, and then it would have this water pool, and they begin to look in it and reflecting. And when we look at that from that kind of perspective, when you've got a 555-foot obelisk and this huge pool array that's pointed straight away from it and in direct alignment with the dome of the Capitol, it should make us go, with all of these streets running back and forth, go, maybe, just maybe, there's something more to this story than what it might appear to be, especially when we start lining up on these calendar dates. And so on September 22nd of this year, on the after the 250th anniversary on July 4th, then we're going to come to September 22nd, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And it's going to all line up. Now, President Trump just ordered the reflecting pool to be fixed and repaired, and they did this emergency thing, and they took this black polymer, or blue polymer, the dark navy blue of our flag, and they relined that entire thing, and then they put micro bubblers inside of that to keep so that it would always reflect clean all the way. The algae won't grow, so on and so forth. And when you've done all of that, what you've effectively made is called an interior reflector. And it's basically using water when it's glassy and when it's clear and it has a dark background underneath it. It's perfect reflection, which is beautiful to behold, and it's beautiful to look at. But it was actually that kind of a system, that reflective system, that was part of a pagan culture. And why are we redoing that at this particular time, in this particular moment in history? And it made me scratch my head just a little bit more. And I began to think about this 250th anniversary. We have this huge pagan monolithic um, piece right sitting in the middle of our capital, and this big, huge pool. And I'm like, and all the streets of Washington are built into a diagram. If you've not seen that, it's a pentagram, to be honest. And so when you're looking at all of that, and that was built so precisely so many years ago, and if the books are true, like the Book of Enoch, the fallen ones are the ones that are guiding this piece, perhaps just maybe um, some of the rumors about CERN might actually be true. Now, CERN is using huge particle accelerators, massive amounts of energy to try and split an atom and to open whatever they want to open. Many of us might believe that they're trying to open up a portal. And if you know the Book of Enoch, then you'd be saying there might try and be open up a portal to those 90% of demonic forces that are still down below. Maybe it's a military last coup to try and find something to happen. But something is definitely going on. And it should make us scratch our heads and do some more research, which is what I'm going to be doing. And looking at this is why are all these lining up on the calendar right now on the Jubilee calendar? Why are we sitting here with moving America away from being our partner with Israel that just wiped out so many forces that were trying to destroy Israel just for a good deal? Um, there's some things that aren't adding up right now. And I'm just wondering, perhaps, even in the founding of our nation, did we leave things open up for other gods by being open? Because we didn't say one nation under Jehovah or one nation under Yahweh. We said one nation under God. And to a Christian at that point, that would be an absolute that's what we're talking about. But when something's left opaque, and that's an opaque statement that leaves it open to be translated different ways, moved to different ways. Um, when we've got a all-seeing eye on our dollar bill and a big pyramid and all of these Masonic symbols and Statue of Liberty built in with all of these kind of things in the eye, looking like the idol of Istar, should make you kind of scratch your head just a little bit and go, I just wonder what's going on. And so when I look at that, I'm looking at the nation, our nation, the nation I live in, the nation I love. I served 10 years of my life behind with in the military almost, and my wife served 24 years. People used to think that if they cut George, he'd bleed red, white, and blue. And I still bleed red, white, and blue and believe in this nation, but this nation is at a precipice. Either we're going to tear down the things that have set themselves up against God, or we're going to keep going down that same direction. And we've not, I just did the research in the first 6 months of this year. We're set to make a new record on how many abortions have been performed. And that's because we've opened up this new avenue of mail order abortion pills. And so even tracking that is probably less than what it actually is. So if we're not going to tear down the high places, and we're just going to have a rededication ceremony and say that yes, we're a Christian nation, or yes, we are, then we need to act like a Christian nation. We need to set up the things for a Christian nation. And by the way, a nation that calls upon the name of Yahweh, His name. Now that's a covenant nation, of which God is not in His Word declared a covenant with the United States. He didn't declare a covenant with Babylon, yet he used Babylon. Babylon had to pay a price, but he used Babylon. And so you even look at the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the coming of the Messiah in to rescue them. Just because we're a nation that's moving in a direction does not mean Obama might have been right. So, we're no longer a Christian nation. That could have been true, but we just rededicated this nation that I live in and that I love, back to God, are we going to do the things that honor God then? And kind of separating away from Israel, um, having this big, huge obelisk and idols that are in our nation. Are we going? Could you imagine the fallout if we said, well, you know what? We just recognized that the Statue of Liberty was not actually built as a Statue of Liberty. It was a statue of Escar, and we just want to tear it down. Man, the nation would go crazy. But it might very well be that. Could you imagine the nation of Israel having so many idols that they've grown up with and loved and offered to, and then somebody gets anointed king like Josiah, and they come and they start tearing all the high places down, says, no, we're going back to God. It'd be a hard one. That'd be a hard one. So I'm not exactly sure where to take that piece, but I know this. I know that we've got a limited amount of time to bring people into the kingdom of God. And it could be that there's some things getting ready to happen in the United States that might even shorten that time. Or maybe the king comes back early. Maybe the king comes back right on time. The day and the hour unknown. But we're approaching an unprecedented time that's never been done in the history of the United States. As a matter of fact, I ran the odds by looking at the calendar and extrapolating that data out. You know that it will not happen again for centuries for that particular day to fall on a holy day. Not even the holy day of but that particular day, the Feast of Trumpets day. I don't know what's going to come of it, but I thought I'd just kind of put this out there that we're doing some things as a nation right now that's not reflecting God. But we have an opportunity to really be a nation for God, or maybe the enemy's trying to get our nation to turn a different direction. President Trump's not going to be in office forever. And that's the truth. And who knows where it's going to go. And I don't even know if there's anything to this. It's just astronomically insane when you look at the odds of the Feast of Trumpets falling on the equinox on our exact 250th anniversary. You know, at the end of a Jubilee, you have to renew a contract. Are you God's or not God's? That's the question. Have a blessed day. I hope it was kind of informational. We'll be doing some more podcasts coming up. Please take a look at some of the stuff down below. I did put Ken, BibleFacts.org on there. He does a lot of work on all of the Qumran scrolls, on the Ethiopian canon, and some good information, especially on around the Jubilee calendar, the solar calendar. He's very, very learned and very informative. I invite you to take a look at some of his stuff at BibleFacts.org. And so have a great one. We'll see you next week.